As a patent attorney with over 20 years of experience, I've seen a lot of clients who are intimidated and confused about how to draft a provisional patent application. So in this video, I'm going to give you the insider techniques of how to draft a provisional application related to software or computer inventions, and how to make it easy so you can maximize the benefit and protection that you get from the provisional application. So what do I mean by computer inventions or software-related inventions? For example, this could be a web page or a phone app that receives data, sends it to a server, gets a response, and presents an output to a user. It could be something also like a standalone product, such as a robotic system or an appliance that operates primarily locally via software or firmware. So obviously some of these systems have physical components, so check out my video as well related to drafting provisional patent applications on physical inventions. So let's start off with some basics about provisional patent applications to make sure that we're all on the same page. So there's two ways to start the patent process. One is with a non-provisional patent application, and this is the full formal application that should be attorney drafted, has all the formal requirements, tends to be pretty expensive, and this is the application you file at the USPTO, and it waits in line for 1 to 3 years before examination begins, and then it starts a negotiation with the examiner where you're trying to convince the examiner that what you have is new and non-obvious over the prior art, and you're trying to get the broadest claims possible. So this back and forth can go on for a long time. It could be months, sometimes years, and hopefully your application is allowed eventually and then will issue as a patent. So the other way to start the process, and what we're going to be talking about today, is with a provisional patent application. Provisional patent applications are just a placeholder. They only last for 1 year. They automatically expire at the end of the year, and that term cannot be extended. Now, one of the most important things to understand about provisional patent applications is that you only get credit for what you actually disclose in the application. The USPTO is literally going to accept pretty much anything that you file and will slap patent pending on that and will give you a filing date. But it's completely possible that you could file a provisional patent application and it's going to be totally worthless. I've seen this a lot of times where people just have a 1-paragraph abstract, this tiny little disclosure, and yes, they can get a filing date on it and technically they're patent pending, but that is absolutely worthless and gives them no protection. Now, even if you do a good job and have a lot of description, especially with computer and software related inventions, it's especially tricky. I've seen people with very detailed descriptions of how the software works or how the hardware works or how the overall network or system works. But at the same time, they don't have the right details. And yeah, while they have a lot of content, it's the wrong content. And so it doesn't really give them all that much protection. And it makes the provisional kind of worthless. Now, when learning how to draft a provisional patent application, it's pretty much as important to understand what not to focus on as to what to actually focus on. And this is a big issue I see with a lot of folks is, like I said, they draft these huge descriptions, but it has the wrong details and they focus on the wrong things and they spend all their energy on stuff that is effectively worthless. So the first thing I notice a lot of times is people trying to write like a patent attorney. It's a huge mistake, and it's a lot of effort in trying to have a certain style when that style doesn't really help with patentability. Yes, it's fun to try to draft like a patent and use that language, but you're not going to get a lot of benefit. You should save your energy and your effort for things that are actually going to give you some protective benefit. Some other things that I see a lot of times that people are spending their time on are things like the title, the field of the invention, the background, or the claims section. So with the title, do not agonize over the title. I've talked to some people where they say, oh, I've gone back and forth on the title and we spent all this time workshopping it. Like, do not spend that time. That is wasted time. I'll tell you later on the things that you want to focus on. Similar, you'll see in non-provisional patent applications, they have the field of invention. Again, this is not required for provisional patent applications. Don't spend any time on it. It's not required. And especially if you're going to be agonizing over something like this, save your effort for something else. Another thing, and this is especially a counterintuitive one, is the background section. I see a lot of people who sometimes they'll spend more time on the background section than the actual detailed description. And really, the background section doesn't really give you a lot of benefit. The main target audience for the background section is going to be people like investors and people who don't know about patents who are reading the patent application. Especially in a provisional, which is not substantively examined at all, it doesn't really matter having a background. If anything, backgrounds can actually be used against you. So anything that you have in the background is admitted prior art. And so a lot of times, I'll leave a background section out or keep it very, very basic. And later on, I'm going to give you some suggestions on how to do the background section right. The next one is claims. Now, claims, for one, they are not required in a provisional patent application. And this is another place where I see people trying to write like a patent attorney, and they have a good time drafting these claims, but they're effectively worthless. There's no benefit to having claims in a provisional patent application, aside from one little asterisk that I'll discuss later on, but it's not something you should spend a lot of time on. I see a lot of folks who spend all this time trying to craft these claims and trying to write like a patent attorney, and usually that's going to be worthless, and they spend more time on this than drafting the detailed description, which is the most important thing. Another thing is perfect drawings, and while having good drawings is important, they don't need to be absolutely perfect. So a mistake that people make is they spend all this time learning how to do something on CAD, and they have to have these perfect drawings and spend hours and hours and hours when they could have done things really quickly, just sketching things out by hand or sketching things out on the computer in a basic kind of way. Drawings don't need to be absolutely perfect. And one thing I tell people a lot of times is I would rather have a bunch of sketches that are really crappy and janky than one super perfect, really nice drawing. So don't spend too much time on these things. Focus on what's really important, which is the detailed description. So then what are the things you should actually be focusing on if you want to draft a provisional application and make it easy while also getting the most protection and getting the best filing date possible? So the first thing is, instead of trying to write like a patent attorney and learn how to do that, write in the plain language of an engineer or a developer, and write in language that you would understand or someone like that would understand. Now, the true standard is it just needs to be such that one of ordinary skill in the art, that being your average person who works in the field, can make and use the invention based on your description. So that's a mistake a lot of people make, is they try to draft like a patent attorney, use all this flowery language, but they should really write in their own voice, especially for people who know about software, who know about computer systems. Write in language that you understand. That should be the target voice. That is so much easier than trying to write in this new contrived kind of way. Write in your own language, and it's going to be so much easier for you. So a good example as far as like what information you want to provide and on what level, think if you had to outsource development of your product and you had to give a guide to somebody that, if they were an engineer, right, or a software developer, someone like that, if they could make the invention and use it based off of that description without having to give you without having to ask you for any more information, what would that guide be? What were the basic things that a software engineer would need to have to be able to make and use your invention? Now, another critical thing, especially for software and computer-related inventions, is focusing on how the system works and not just what it is. This is the biggest mistake I see folks make when they're drafting their own provisional applications related to software and computer technology. They say, hey, this thing is so much better and has this functionality, does this, and it happens faster, and here's the hardware it's running on. It's so much better and has these functionalities, but that's kind of worthless. It's not about what the system does. It's about how it does that. And I'll talk a bit later about how to actually get protective value and how to cover the how instead of just the what. So then for computer and software inventions, what's going to be most important is going to be the method that is performed to create the functionalities of the software product or the system. So for instance, you have an interface and input is received, and then what happens then? Like, where is that input sent? Where is that data sent to? Say it goes to a server. What processing goes on at the server side? How is that data processed? Does it go to other systems, or is it just directly sent back to the user device? And then what happens at the user device? How is that presented at the user device? It's going to be those methods that are going to be most important to patentability. Now, when it comes to drafting the provisional application, a lot of times it can be easy to start with the figures as a base. So when it comes to drafting figures or drawings for your patent application, you want to be telling a story of how the invention works. And I like to start at the very beginning, the basics. So one is sort of a network diagram. So for instance, you have your system. Is it something that is connected to the internet? How is it connected? Is it via network? Does it talk to a server? Are there a group of servers? What devices are involved in this system? A lot of times it's not just going to be the user device, it's going to be a back-end server. There could be other components. Talk about sort of the basics of the devices. Sometimes this is a really simple thing. It's just going to be a device and a server connected via network. Other times it can be more complex, and sort of have a general diagram of that. Next is, if you have something that has an interface, have an example of what that interface is. Maybe you haven't built it. That's totally fine. But just sketch out a basic understanding of what the interface is so that you can tell that story of how do users interact with this? What are the buttons? Things like that. What sort of information is being input? Another thing I like to have is swim or data flow diagrams, and I'll show some examples of those here. Those can be helpful in understanding how data is obtained, what sort of data is obtained, where does it go, how is it processed down the road, say on the server side, what goes on there, and then what data is sent back to the user device. Those can be really helpful in understanding the flow of data in the system. Also, method diagrams, and this is how data is processed. So a lot of times you'll have these method steps, and I'll provide you some examples here of what method diagrams look like. But really, it can be really simple, it can be complex. Just make sure that if you start getting these really, really huge diagram with a lot of method steps, try to break it up into multiple figures if it's too complex. Now, these are just some examples of things that I find to be useful in drafting invention disclosures or provisional patent applications or non-provisional patent applications related to computer software and computer hardware technology. But if these things are difficult, if you've never seen these before, if you're not comfortable with this, don't feel like you need to learn how to draft these sort of figures or these diagrams. You don't want to be doing something and learning something from scratch. If these don't make sense to you, write things in a way or draw things in a way or create figures in a way that makes sense to you. There's no right way, there's no wrong way to do these things. If you don't have some of these diagrams in there, hey, it's not that big of a deal. You just need to get the information out in a way that is understandable to software developers or engineers, people who work in the field. That's what's most important. It's not a specific form that it needs to be in. And these are just some examples, so don't feel like you have to use any of these. Once you have the figures, then you're going to want to start drafting the detailed description. Now, in certain patent applications, you'll see all sorts of other things like the background, the field of invention, a summary. But what's really important is having a detailed description. Don't worry too much about having these special sections and having these things that are required. Like, that doesn't really matter that much. What really matters is the detailed description. That's where you should be focusing most of your time. So this should really be a walkthrough of the drawing. So start with each drawing and go into great detail about the drawing, what it shows, what the pieces are, how they're interconnected. Go into great detail about each drawing. Be sure to write in narrative form, so don't have bullets or just don't have it be an outline. Have it be in narrative form and have a lot of detail. It's not just sort of a summary of things, just with bullet points. It should be a full description about things. So of course you're going to be talking about the main embodiment that you have, that being sort of the main commercial product that you have envisioned or that you're actually going to be coming out with. But you want to describe all sorts of variations as well. And that's how you have a really broad patent application that's going to be able to cover a lot of variations in addition to what you're looking to do. Because really, you want to cover what you're doing, but also what competitors are going to do. You want to have it so that if competitors come in the market, they can't easily design around your patent application and make little tweaks and changes to it, and then suddenly they're doing something that's totally different. You want all the variations to be covered so that if competitors come out and do it, they're still going to be infringing. But similarly, and this happens a lot in product development, especially with startups, as you get it in front of customers and investors, and as you do more R&D, your product is going to change. So you're going to want to talk about things that you may do in the future. Think about things that are going to be better. So if price was no object, for instance, if you could spend as much money as you wanted on manufacturing or things like that, what are the things that you would do that are maybe going to be the second or third generation once you've built the company more? Talk about those things now, because then you're going to be able to protect them now. You can protect them well before you're doing it. You can protect them well before your competitors are doing them. Also, you want to be thinking about things that are better and things that are really good, but also think about things that are second and third best. So a good example here is that, let's say we have a competitor who comes out and they come out with this crappy version of what you're doing, not something that you would ever want to have. You will still want that to be protected. And so talk about ways that maybe it'll be slower or cheaper, or it's, for whatever reason, it's not going to be as good. Talk about those examples as well, because if a competitor comes out and they have some crappy version that's not as good, you still want that to be covered as well, so you can stop them even though it's not as good of a product. And people always say, well, but I don't necessarily know what we're going to do. We don't have the specifics. Make stuff up. That's totally fine. You can come up with a lot of different examples, brainstorm, have a good time with it, make things up. You can throw in as much as you want. And if you happen to then actually implement some of these things, you'll want to have that description in there. If your competitors come out and they happen to have those things in there, you're going to want to have that description in there. So throw in the kitchen sink, come up with a lot of different variations. You are not limited to just what you're able to do now or what you know that you can do now. You can put in all sorts of fun variations. Another thing that can be really useful when drafting your provisional application is doing a walkthrough of how the product is actually used in the real world. So how would somebody actually interact with it? How would they use it? And if it's a computer product, so for instance, how would, what goes on at the server side? So, a user is using it, then data is sent to the server, what goes on there, and what is the specific data that is being processed, and then what is the output in a very specific sort of use case. And with products too, what are people actually going to be doing with this thing? Who is going to be using it? Is it going to be a scientist or a consumer, or is it going to be an engineer? Who are the people who are going to actually be using this, and in what context? Tell a story. That can be really helpful, and these things aren't going to be limiting if you do them right. Now, drafting the figures and the detailed description should be 95% of the effort that you're putting into the provisional patent application. So then what is going to be that extra 5% of drafting that you're going to be doing? One is that if you have time, write a short summary of the invention sort of based on your full description and put that at the beginning of the detailed description. It can kind of be good to have a summary up front without referring to the drawings, just to kind of give somebody a little kind of like an abstract, but put that in the detailed description as well. Also, if you have time, you can write a background section. People love to write background sections because it kind of sets up the problem. But one of the important things with that is you're not required to have a background. It's not an essential thing that most people are going to be looking at. But a lot of times, if you're going to be showing the provisional application to investors and things like that, that can really be good optics for them. It can sort of set up the problem and what the current state of the art is. But the critical thing with the background is do not talk about your invention in the background. Anything in the background is admitted to be prior art and can be used against you. That's why a lot of times we just skip the background section or make it really, really short or high level. Don't go anything above 1 to 2 paragraphs. It's kind of a waste of time. Another thing is the title. And like I said, I hear people who say, well, we like workshop the title and we're going back and forth. No, don't do it. Just have a really quick title. I mean, really, most of the time what we're going to do is going to be whatever it is, and then just tack systems and methods on to the end. Don't put more than a few minutes into the title. It really does not matter. It's not going to be something that's going to make any sort of difference whatsoever. And the final thing that you should not be spending much time on is the claims section. So I did say claims are not required in a provisional patent application, but for purposes of foreign protection, you need to have at least one dummy claim in there. And it's really simple. I'll give you the language now. It's just the systems and methods shown and described herein. That should be it for the claims. There is a page at the end. It says claims. There is the number 1, and then it just says the systems and methods described here, and that should be it. Do not spend a lot of time trying to formulate claims and draft them like a patent attorney or sound like a patent. That is a huge waste of your time and effort. And the biggest mistake I see people make with the claims is they end up putting in so much more detail in the claims that really should have been in the detailed description, things that like aren't in the detailed description but are just in the claims. And if they're just in the claims, they're really not supported. The support comes from the detailed description. Now, claims, like I said, are not required in provisional applications. Nothing happens to claims. The provisional application is just a placeholder. It is not examined in any substantive way. It is only at the non-provisional stage that then you will have claims, and then you will have to have the examination process related to those claims. So please do not waste your time on claims. It's one of those things that, it's a total waste of time. You should be focusing on that detailed description because that's where protection really is. So with the full structure of the provisional application in mind, here are some additional important details that you need to be mindful of. One is the drawings must be in full black and white, and this means they cannot have grayscale, and of course they cannot have color. It needs to be 100% black and white. So when you're drafting the drawings, pull out any sort of grayscale, pull out any sort of color, make sure that it's going to be full true black and white, because when you file the drawings at the USPTO, it's going to be converted to black and white. And the problem I see a lot of times is people have color or other things that makes it so that that's their understanding there, and important details can be obscured and lost upon conversion at the USPTO. So make sure you have true black and white drawings that you're going to be submitting. Another thing, like I said, is the drawings don't have to be absolutely perfect. You can do hand-line drawings, and as long as it's black and white, that's totally fine. I always say I would rather have a ton of drawings and figures that are crappy and hand-drawn than one perfect CAD drawing that you spend hours and hours and hours on. So the drawings can be incorporated into the description. That's totally fine. Having the drawings in line if you feel like that's helpful. But whether or not you do that, definitely have each drawing on a separate sheet of its own in as large size as possible. The reason here is because, again, you only get credit for what is actually filed. And sometimes people file the drawings and they're kind of small, tiny form, and the small details or the small text gets lost upon filing, and you don't get credit for that. So even if you have stuff in line in the text document, create specific sheets with each of the drawing figures and have it fill up as much space as possible so the small details and the small text, they aren't lost. And of course, the biggest thing when drafting the provisional application is that content is way more important than form. I would rather have way more detail and have there even be spelling mistakes and have it just be flow of consciousness than have, maybe a page or two that is perfectly written like a patent attorney and has flowery language and things like that. It's way better to have almost informal description in narrative form than to have this perfectly crafted prose. So detail and more volume of detail, that's going to get you more protective value. It's not in just the form of how that is provided. So being able to draft it like a patent attorney does not help give you more protection in the provisional application. It's best to start the drafting process with just kind of a brain dump. Get all the information down on paper and then go back to refine it. So one of the things that you don't want to have in there is limiting language. You want to remove that once you've kind of gotten all the concepts down on paper. Now, the thing about limiting language is that if you have this in the provisional application, and especially in the non-provisional application, it can be used against you down the road to limit your scope of protection and make it so that people can say, well, you limited yourself to this very specific thing. Our product doesn't infringe because you use this specific language. Okay, so the basics of removing limited language is don't have anything that describes the whole invention. And strangely enough, the best practice is never to use the term invention ever. Everything is just an example. It's an embodiment. You never want to pin it down to say the invention is this, or the invention is critically including these things, or it has to do this. Have everything be optional, because yes, that may be important in your embodiment, in your commercial embodiment, but a competitor may not have that. And so if you limit yourself to saying this is essential, this has to be in there, the invention is this, that can be used against you down the road. And of course, you want to talk about, hey, in some examples, it can be important to do this or that, but couch it in being in specific examples or specific embodiments. Now, unfortunately, limiting language is really confusing and counterintuitive, and one of those things that even patent attorneys, it takes years and years and years of experience to kind of learn about these things. It's not something that is easy to describe in a lot of ways, and so that's why a lot of times I suggest doing what I call a coached provisional patent application. And so, for instance, what I'll do is I will coach my clients on drafting invention disclosures that then I will scrub to remove limiting language. If anything, broaden things here and there, make sure it has the right formatting, make sure it has the right detail, and then file that as a provisional patent application. That tends to be the right balance in terms of cost and time and ROI, especially for clients that are going to be doing startups and things where it's really important. If you definitely don't have any money, if you are on a budget, or if you're just kind of doing this for fun, maybe you don't necessarily need to run it through a patent attorney. But if you have a startup and it's important that you get solid protection, a lot of times doing the coach provisional can be really good. Make sure you run it by a patent attorney to make sure that you actually do have the right detail, that it's in the right form, that you don't have limiting language, and that you don't have stuff in there that's going to like bite you in the ass down the road that you can't undo. Now, once you've drafted everything and removed limiting language, then you want to do sort of the final formatting of things if things aren't already formatted. One thing to keep in mind is that USPTO is going to accept pretty much anything that you file as a provisional patent application. So you need to make sure that it's in the right form, because the PTO is not going to tell you that you've screwed things up. And it's only going to be years down the road when you're trying to get priority based on this provisional application that it's going to be in litigation or enforcement that people are going to say, oh, well, you actually had this limiting language in there. You know, your drawings, they were too small and you couldn't see these details, so you don't get this priority. So make sure that you have things right before you file the application. Like I said, it's great insurance to have a patent attorney do this kind of work with the coach provisional. Make sure it's in the right form. This can be especially important if you're going to be attracting investors. Investors are going to have to see this provisional application, and they're going to want it to smell right and look right. And if it doesn't, they're going to be more likely to pass on you as a potential investment. Some of the simple things are to make sure that you have the same font throughout. Make sure it's at least 12-point size so that when you file it, the small text isn't lost. And then have things with paragraph numbers. Number each paragraph. I'll kind of give you an example here. And then put the drawings, if you have them in line, in the text, also put them in separate sheets so that the small text and maybe small figures and small little aspects of the drawings aren't lost. You want to have them on separate sheets. Then what you do is just send it to your patent attorney to file it as a provisional application, or they'll do this editing for you and they'll be ready to file it, or you can then just file it yourself.